And finally, welcome to part 3. If you could see what I see, you'd realize I'm not just staring at the computer. Okay, now we're going to leave the world of the endoparasites and talk about ectoparasites. So here in part 3, we're going to describe some basic life cycles and diseases caused by the common ectoparasites. In particular, the flea is what we want to talk about. And then we'll describe mechanisms of action and potential adverse effects of some of the external parasitics, in particular, flea and tick preventives. Well, do any of these products look familiar? Some of these we saw earlier. Some may look new to you, like Capstar, NexGard, and Bravecto. It's important to be familiar with these different products because clients will find them. Different clinics are going to carry different products, and you'd want to be comfortable describing them. Now, external parasitics they can sometimes just be a nuisance, like fleas, although fleas can also lead to very severe allergies. External parasites can affect weight gain. If you've got a bunch of cattle or goats and you want them to gain weight, well, they're not going to if they're all itchy and miserable, which is what a lot of these parasites do. Some of these parasites transmit disease to the dog, and they can even transmit disease to the person. If a dog brings home a tick with Lyme disease, well, the tick might drop off the dog and start sucking your blood. Of course, this poor little bunny rabbit has ear mites. This horse has a condition called coolicoides hypersensitivity. It's also called sweet itch. Again, the subtitles are giving it strange names, but it's an allergic reaction to a very, very tiny fly. The external parasitics, antiparasitics, are mostly used to treat these external parasites. They can come in many different forms, collars, dips, sprays, powders. I have a bag right here. So you can take a bag like this and fill it with a powder, and then the cow will come along and play with it and get the anti-parasitic on his or her head. And they even make ear tags that have the anti-parasitic in it to help discourage flies. You can, and then here's this just shows you some cows. They've got the bags that they're playing with, and they're getting the powder on them. So it's a lot easier than trying to pour something on their back, right? But we can do that too. These are the anti-parasitics we're going to talk about, and we'll try to hit the most important qualities for each of them here. Like the internal antiparasitics, most of these work as neurotoxins. They're going to inhibit a neurotransmitter or enhance one. Again, basically, it's either going to excite the parasite to death or put them to sleep. Those are basically the, you could say excite them to death or relax them to death. You'll see what I mean. It's really important to understand the flea life cycle, since that's one major reason we use some of these products. And if you watch the video, uh, it went over this. You should watch it again. You really want to know the flea life cycle, not just for my tests, but for life, okay? Because there are some common myths that you will hear. Sometimes you'll hear them 10 times a day, all right? So you want to be a flea warrior. The flea is not going to jump from dog to dog. When a flea gets on the dog, it's in a wonderful, warm restaurant and it never wants to leave. What happens is the flea is going to lay 40 to 50 eggs every single day. So think of the flea as being like a salt shaker, shaking these little flea eggs all over the house. These hatch little maggots, or they're called larvae. But when you're talking to clients, make it as disturbing as possible. Don't call them larvae, they're maggots. And then they spin a little cocoon, and the flea develops inside this cocoon. It can stay in there for 5 or 10 months before it finally emerges. And this is really the problem. So some of these myths, if you hear an owner say, we control fleas with a flea bath, well, they're killing the flea, but it does nothing for all of these eggs and larvae. You can give a dog a flea bath, but tomorrow this pupa hatches, a new flea jumps on, and the cycle starts all over again. If an owner says, well, we use flea bombs, guess what? Nothing kills the pupa. Flea bombs do not kill pupa. Frost does not kill the pupa. The pupa is laughing at us. And then owners will say, if we had fleas, they would bite us. No. If they have a really bad flea infestation and the fleas are desperate, they'll bite you. But in general, you are way too cold. Fleas do not like to bite you. And I had to put PT Flea in there from A Bug's Life. So, okay. But now we'll come back to fleas later. Let's talk about some of the actual antiparasitics. So this is a very old group. They're called organophosphates and carbamates, and they show up with lots and lots of different names. Mostly you're going to see them in the really cheap flea collars. Again, mostly you'll see organophosphates and carbamates in really cheap flea collars. So here's Hartz has an UltraGuard, and it's hard to see, but it has the active ingredient is tetrachlorvinphos. So again, that word phos makes you think, oh, phosphate, organophosphates. These excite the flea to death. They bind to an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. Now, you may remember we talked about acetylcholine, and it's the rest and digest. It's the rest and digest neurotransmitter. In fact, I'm sorry, I misspoke. This one does not excite the flea to death. This relaxes the flea to death. So let me start over. Normally, this rest and digest neurotransmitter does its job, and then it gets broken down by this enzyme. Well, these organophosphates, they prevent that from happening. So it's like an overdose of acetylcholine. It's an overdose of resting and digesting. And then that's what kills the flea. They're basically relaxed to death. Now, why do I mention this? I mention this because you may see cases of animals getting into organophosphates. These same chemicals show up in pesticides. If you go looking in your own garage, you may have some old products that contain organophosphates. And during springtime, people garden and dogs roll around in the dirt, or horses might, you know, lick something, and we get these symptoms with the acronym SLUD. And this is a human thing too. If you Google SLUD or sludge, you'll see cases where humans have poisonings, and it causes, again, this kind of overdose of the rest and digest system. So we get this excessive salivation. That's what you're seeing in the horse. Lacrimation just means a lot of tear production. You start pooping and peeing, trouble breathing and vomiting. Again, I don't know why that happens, but those are some of the signs that if a patient came in the springtime, if a dog or cat or horse came in with these signs, you might consider you might consider asking them, are there any gardening chemicals that this dog or cat or horse or goat got into? Okay, the next group we'll talk about are called the pyrethrins and the pyrethroids. Again, a large group of selectively toxic. In other words, unlike the organophosphates, which are not, they're toxic to everyone, these pyrethrins are selectively toxic to fleas in particular. So they're relatively safe. You'll see in a moment, there's one that's not so safe for cats. But as a group, these are relatively safe. Apparently, though, they can be deadly to fish. They get absorbed across the fish's skin. So if you had a koi pond, you wouldn't want, you wouldn't want your dog, you wouldn't want to use this dog shampoo and then your dog jumps in the koi pond. These are made from chrysanthemums. So these are natural derivatives of chrysanthemums. Pyrethrin, you can see it here in this dip. It's found, if you look closely, you'd see that this flea shampoo has pyrethrins. It's not a very fast killer of fleas and ticks. It's very satisfying because it stuns them, but they can recover from it. So what did they do? They took pyrethrins and they modified them into something more effective, and those are called pyrethroids. Just like opioids are made from opiates, pyrethroids are made from pyrethrins. How the pyrethroids work, and I assume this is how the pyrethrins work, is they lock open those sodium channels on neurons. To just be brief about it, they lock them open, and that can have different effects. So one type of pyrethroid will kill by causing seizures. Another one will kill by causing paralysis. Is that important? Not really, except for cats. And I'll come to that in a minute. This permethrin can be deadly to cats. We don't see this very much, but there are certain flea products that contain permethrin. Advantage 2, for example, contains permethrin, I'm sorry. In fact, if you look down the corner there, it says do not use in cats. I don't know why, but it will cause, it's a type 1, and so these cats they look like they're having a seizure. And when I first started in 2003, I probably saw permethrin toxicity in one cat every month or two. And you'd have to give There's always check the label. We'd have to give the cat a bath, and we'd give them a, one of the anti-seizure medicines like diazepam or phenobarbital, but we don't see, I think there must be less permethrins. We don't see permethrin toxicity very much. These porons for horses and cattle usually have some sort of pyrethroid like permethrin or something. There's a million pyrethroids, and the book goes into such detail, I don't know why. The point is always check the label. When owners will buy they'll buy flea products, and they may not realize that it says do not use on cats. They should get their flea products from you. Let's talk about ticks. So there is there are a lot of new flea products that kill fleas and ticks. But there are still some, there may be some people that fleas are not really a concern. They just want tick prevention. People who live in Lake Tahoe, for example, there may not be a lot of fleas at that altitude, but there may be ticks. So this is a collar that contains a antiparasitic called Amitraz. I misspelled the name of the product. It should be Preventic. Amitraz formerly was used as a dip for dogs with Demodex. Remember, we talked about Demodex at the very start. Now we don't use it for that, but it's still a really excellent tick preventive. It's kind of interesting how it works. Its mechanism of action is it's an alpha-2 agonist and a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Do those terms sound familiar to you? They should, because you learned those terms in week 3 or 4. You learned about alpha-2 agonists. We use them as sedatives in dogs and horses and every animal. Drugs like dexdomitor, xylazine. Again, the subtitles are very goofy. And you learned about monoamine oxidase inhibitors. You learned about one called selegiline that is used to treat cognitive canine disorder, or also known as doggy dementia. So why does that matter? Well, if you had a dog who was really on selegiline, don't use this collar. That would overdose them. In fact, if you have a dog taking any sort of behavior altering drug like Prozac, well, it's not called Prozac, but any of the drugs we learned about, those drugs that are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the drugs that are going to influence levels of dopamine, serotonin, things like that, do not use this collar. So that's why it's important to get a good history from clients. And of course, don't let dogs chew on this collar because they would get a big dose of alpha-2 agonists and monoamine oxidase inhibitors. We'll tell clients to take the collar and they can tape it inside the regular collar. That way, there's no chance of it coming off. And luckily, if a dog did eat their Preventic collar, we can treat it with an alpha-2 antagonist, like we learned about in week 4. Hey, it's macrolides again. So these are also used for controlling mites, and some flies will try to lay their eggs in the skin of cattle and horses. So the macrolides are very good at that. They're not good. They're very poor against fleas and ticks. there's all these different forms. Well, I should say everything I just said was for ivermectin. It's probably also true for these others, eprinomectin, doramectin, but these are great. We pour them on. It prevents mites and lice and can repel flies. Um, um, they will also kill nematodes. A lot of these will get absorbed into the body. So there's different reasons we use that. There's Revolution again. That's the one we put on dogs and cats. It treats heartworm, roundworms. It can treat ear mites, so it's a nice all-in-one. Milbemycin we talked about, moxidectin. Again, it's hard to keep these straight, but just remember they're all macrolides. And just be aware of all they can do. Before I introduce the next antiparasitic, this was kind of interesting. I will confess we had some big bugs running around our house when we first moved in. And so I went to the hardware store and I bought these little roach motels, and they worked great. We haven't had any problems since. And you can't see, but if you look very closely, the product in this is called fipronil. Not fipronil, but fipronil. Fipronil, right there. This product used to be a really awesome flea preventive. This was one of the first flea preventives, I think, back in the 1980s. Before that, all we had were pyrethrins and pyrethroids. So this was really a lifesaver. It's found in Frontline Plus, and now it's found in a lot of generic brands. So the Walmart brand is called Armor Guard, I think. So you'll see fipronil in a lot of different products. Here's some generic. Someone got this at a convention. It's some generic cat flea medicine, and it has fipronil in it. The problem is some fleas are developing resistance to it. And again, that's something you can talk about in next week's discussion. It's another neurotoxin. It overstimulates the flea and kills them. It's a topical medicine. It goes into the dog's skin. It dissolves into their sebaceous oils and glands and then sits there. It's often combined with methoprene. Again, if you look down there, you can see it says S-methoprene. And that's something called an insect growth regulator. And we're going to talk more about those later. Something important is you cannot use fipronil on a rabbit. If a rabbit had fleas or lice or ticks, you do not want to use fipronil. It can be toxic to rabbits. I don't know why, but do not let anybody use fipronil on a rabbit. Another topical that came along in the 1980s was called Advantage. It belongs to a class called the neonicotinoids. Now, I can't believe anybody knows the word neonicotinoid. So just know what imidacloprid is and know what nitimpyram is. Imidacloprid is found in Advantage. Both of these drugs cause overstimulation of fleas. They both work well against fleas. If someone wanted to research in next week's discussion whether fleas are developing resistance to imidacloprid, I think that would be very useful. You might not find anything. Maybe fleas are still sensitive to it, but we always worry. It's been around for a long time. It also shows up in this collar called Seresto, made by the same company. I think that this is the one flea collar that really works. So I think it's a good product, and it contains a tick, an anti-tick drug called flumethrin. A similar drug is called Netimpyram. The trade name is Capstar. We love Capstar. We love Capstar. Now, it's an oral pill, so I don't really know why they put it. It's not an external antiparasitic, but it kills an external parasite. So it works really fast. So if you're working in a clinic or you're working in an animal shelter and the dog or cat is covered in fleas, we can give them Capstar and the fleas will be dead within 30 minutes. They will drop off. Some patients will itch more. I've been told that as the fleas die, they just start biting and biting, and so that can really irritate the patient. And there's something about Capstar where I think it kills faster than all of these other drugs. I think, at least that used to be. So we considered it almost magical, and because it was it would protect dogs and cats who were allergic to fleas. It would protect them very well. The problem is it only lasts one day. But if you need fleas dead quickly, that was the way to do it. So we're going to finish up with some of the more modern flea products, and these are just amazing. We really love these products. So one of the first belongs to a family called the spinosins. This is Comfortis. So there's Comfortis right there. These were actually discovered in a abandoned rum distillery in the Caribbean. It's got kind of an interesting story. It's again, it's going to overstrip. It's this one is going to again kind of excite the flea to death. It's gonna overstimulate certain receptors, so it'll have an exciting effect on the flea. That's important because it can also have an exciting effect on your patient. And by that I mean, if your patient has a history of seizures, we may decide not to use this product. We can, it's a safe product. Many patients with epilepsy take this product, but we have to be careful. It can lower the seizure threshold, right? So if this, and by threshold, I mean the brain has to get above this point, and if it does, you have a seizure. These drugs lower that threshold. So now you get above this level and you have a seizure. So we can use them, but we just have to be sure we talk to the owners. And if a patient has a history of seizures, we may or may not. It all depends. If the dog's really allergic to fleas, we'll probably still use this. In the old days, to treat Demodex, we used to use high levels of ivermectin. That was the treatment, was giving them ivermectin by mouth. And there was a period of time where we had to remember that because you can't use these flea products if they're receiving ivermectin, because they both can have this, ivermectin also causes neurologic, it's a neurotoxin too. So together they could increase the chances of a patient having having a seizure. But now we don't use ivermectin to treat Demodex. Well, I don't think we do. So these drugs, the spinosins, the drugs are called, one's called spinosad. It shows up in Comfortis and Trifexis. So there's Trifexis, also contains milbemycin. That helps treat heartworm, helps treat intestinal worms. Comfortis just has spinosad, so it's not going to treat heartworm or anything. And then they made Cheristin in cats. Again, it won't do anything for heartworms or intestinal worms. The next group is kind of similar. Again, it's going to cause overstimulation of the flea. I don't know how to say it. Isozolinine, I don't know. You know these drugs if you've seen these commercials where this guy says, I want the fleas dead. You know these products as NexGard and Bravecto. You've probably seen advertisements for them. I have my dog Ginger is on one of these products. Um, um, they're very effective flea products. They are effective against some ticks. So there's one called NexGard. It is not effective against all ticks, just some. And then the one called Bravecto is kind of cool because it works for 12 weeks. You don't have to remember to give it every month. It is only effective against one tick, the Lone Star tick. So if a pet was on this, we might want to put them on that prevent tick collar as well. And then the final thing we'll talk about are these things called insect growth regulators. Now, these don't kill adults, but these are going to interfere or inhibit the maturation of the larval form of the flea. It probably interferes with other arthropods, but we're just talking about the flea. You'll hear it referred to as flea birth control because, but that's kind of a joke. It doesn't prevent a flea from getting pregnant. It just prevents her babies from developing. So recall the flea life cycle. These, what you're seeing here, are lots and lots of eggs. These are little flea eggs. And what you're going to see is, watch, and you're going to see a larva is going to bust out of one of these little eggs. I think it's this one. And so, oh, that one, there he is. So you see he's busting out of the little egg. And now the egg itself is made of a substance called chitin. You might not titin, it's chitin. Yes, chitin. And I'll show you in a moment why that's important. So, oh, I see. I had like the same slide twice, or the same image twice. Anyway, there's our little larva. So we'll come back to that larva in just a moment. These insect growth regulators, there's two types. One type is going to inhibit the development of the actual larva, and that one is called lufeneron. That's probably the most common. It's found in this product, Sentinel, combined with milbemycin. It's going to interfere with chitin in the egg and or chitin in the larva's egg tooth. So I'll show you that in a moment. So if you give a dog Sentinel, that lufeneron will get in the dog's blood, the flea drinks the blood, and now lufeneron is in the flea. And then when the flea lays eggs, its eggs will be faulty. They will maybe collapse on themselves, and the larva may die, or the larva may be unable to break out of the egg. Or the drug may interfere with these little egg teeth. I'm not sure if those are the egg teeth, but that's made of chitin also. And without it, the flea larva cannot break out of the egg. It's kind of a horrible death if you think about it, but they're fleas. The other type of insect growth regulator mimics hormones. And that's, without these hormones, the juvenile flea cannot develop and they just die. And these have products, these are found in products like Frontline Plus, some of the really cheapo flea collars like Hart's UltraGuard Plus. Whenever you see plus or 2, it usually means they've added something like this. It says prevents flea eggs from hatching. That's because it contains something like methoprene or pyroproxyfen. Again, it prevents the eggs from hatching because the larvae die inside the egg. So anyway, okay, so to review, ectoparasites are not only disgusting, but they can harm pets. They can reduce weight gain in livestock. They can even transmit harmful diseases to me and you. Most external antiparasitics are neurotoxins, and they either excite parasites to death or relax or paralyze them to death. Explaining the flea life cycle to clients will save them a lot of grief. Some external antiparasitics are toxic to pets. There are a variety of flea and tick preventives. Some may be more effective than others. The newer oral flea preventives should be used with caution in patients with a history of seizures. And some flea products contain insect growth regulators, which indirectly will kill flea larvae. Blech. Okay, so that was my attempt to parse the most important information from the chapter. You still need to read the chapter. You need to answer the questions. You need to watch those videos. I hope this was helpful. You know how to get a hold of me. And I will see you. Well, maybe I won't see you. Hopefully I'll see you. Okay, bye-bye.